Hello everyone. Today's topic is about Azerbaijani literature. Azerbaijani literature is written in Azerbaijani, a Turkish language, which is the official state language of the Republic of Azerbaijan, while the North Azerbaijani variety is spoken. The source of Azerbaijani literature is the rich and deep Azerbaijani folklore. Azerbaijan has one of the richest folklore treasures in the world, and the traces of the mythological artistic outlook are still manifest in local classical literature and folklore. Azerbaijani folklore has a rich genre, fairy tales and epics from epic folklore genres, proverbs and sayings that expressing the wisdom of the people throughout history have had a strong influence on the folklore and classical literature of neighboring nations. And the greatest monument of Azerbaijani folklore that has come down to us in writing was the epic Kitab-ı Dede Gorgud. And during the periodization of the centuries old history of Azerbaijan literature, the principle of civilization, the realities of literary historical processes and literary trends in Azerbaijani, um, and the ideology of Azerbaijanism had been scientifically substrated. And throughout the history, Azerbaijan literature has taken shape in two distinct forms: oral folk traditions and written works. Both expressions of local souls developed under unique influences, and both continue to serve as beautiful examples of the creative, passionate bent of the Azerbaijani people. Oral folklore developed under the influence of Turkish mentality and language, which historically was intimately connected to the soulful songs of skillful minstrels called ashuks. And alongside this tradition, Azerbaijani epics began to truly take shape in the 13th, 15th centuries with masterpieces such as Kitab-ı Dede Gorgud. And in contrast, written literature developed under distinct Persian and Arabic language, and prominent Azerbaijani authors whose work accelerated the development of the local literature in the 14th, 17th centuries included Ghazi Burhanuddin and Imameddin Nesimi, both of whom heavily relied upon poetry in their writings. And now I want to give my floor to the Nazrin to talk about more detail about Azerbaijan literature.
Azerbaijani folk literature is an oral genre rooted in Central Asian nomadic tradition in its form. Azerbaijani folk literature, on the other hand, depicts the issue unique to a settled people who have abandoned the nomadic lifestyle in its subjects. One example is a collection of folk tales centered on the role of the Keloğlan, a young lad tasked with seeing wife, assisting his mother in maintaining the family home and dealing with troubles created by his neighbors. Nasreddin also illustrates another fundamental transition that happened between the nomadic days of Turkish people and the days when they had primarily set in Azerbaijan and Anatolia. Nasreddin also a Muslim imam. Nasreddin, but also Yunus Emre, a towering figure in Turkish literature and a poet who flourished in the late 13th and early 14th century, most likely in the Karamanid state in south-central Anatolia. Because of Azerbaijani folk literary history spans around 7th and 15th century and continued to this day, it's probably better to look at its from the standpoint of genre. Epic and folk poetry are two primary genres in tradition. The epic tradition, the Turkish epic, has its origins in the Central Asian epic tradition, which gave rise to the Azerbaijan language's Book of Dede Gorgud. The August Turkish oral traditions gave rise to this form. For centuries, the Book of Dada Gorgut was the most important part of the Azerbaijan epic culture in the Caucasus and Anatolia. In the Azerbaijani language, there are about 90 recognized epics. Many of them are love stories, such as Aslan and Kerem. Folk poetry. There are widely speaking traditions of Azerbaijani folk poetry. The Ashigozan tradition, which even taught Matvoit the way of the means religion, became for the most part of secular tradition, and the explicitly religious tradition, which emerged from the collection plays of the Sufi religion, orders, and Shias group. In general, famous Azerbaijan poets and thinkers wrote in Persian. Nasreddin Tusi, Maragall Ofadi, Arif Erdebili attempt to create works following traditions of Nizami. Epic poems of Maragall Ofadi, Jamijam, and Devname are taken into consideration to be an honorable specimen of Azerbaijan epic poetry. Stagnation, hopelessness regarded within the society after Nizami in the various artist works in tradition to within cite the epic Mehir and Mushtari, via way of means of Asar Tabrizi, the natural feeling of love, discovered its genius description and admiration in Khosrow and Shirin and Leyla and Majnun, via way of means and is appeared upon exceptional and disinterested friendship among young humans. I would like to talk about Nizami Gencevi. Genius Azerbaijani poet and philosopher Nizami Gencevi added new thoughts to the records of inventive lifestyle of the mankind in rich shape and content material of Oriental poetry and created dozens monuments of Renaissance literature. Nizami have become well known together along with his 5 poems global. These works being compiled Benesays, the not unusual place, title acquainted with all preceding activities and personalities of the Near and Middle East, express his opinion on them. Studying the poet's creativity, it will become obvious that Nizami had deep understanding in historical Greek, Indian, Chinese, and Arabic philosophy. Many scholars, particularly Armenians and those in Europe, mention Nizami Gencevi as a poet of Persian literature, disputing his Azerbaijan origin and depicting him as a Persian poet. Yet, in the first half of the 20th century, a renowned Russian Soviet expert in Oriental studies, academician Bertels, found out that the mentioned lines were not present in the Azam manuscript. This testified to the fact that the above-mentioned later insertion made by ideology influenced copyists to one of Nizami's poems were a gross falsehood. After revealed of the scientific fact, all prominent Soviet Orientalists, including those who had until then considered Nizami a Persian poet, changed their opinion and stated conclusively and unanimously that the poet came from Azerbaijan. However, the entire discussion was taking place just before the World War II and only in Russian language journals. Up to now, there have been no article, all of the Bartels, a great discovery in and therefore Western scientific publication. Moreover, Western sources still continue to refer Nizami as a Persian poet. Azerbaijan's literature develops in the world direction as in past centuries, and literature takes the position of a lively part of social and political life. Sayyid Imamuddin Nasimi, after his predecessor Nizami Ganjavi, is known as one of the publicist messenger of ideas of humanism, philanthropy in our literature. His works are somewhat the next great step toward the world, humanism and democracy, not only in the literature of Azerbaijan people, but also that of the Near and the Middle East.
15th century in Azerbaijan literature is the crossing level between the peaks Ghazi Nasimi and Hatay Fuzuli. creation of at that period of independent states Algoyunlu and Karakoyunlu in the territory of the country brought some enlivening to literal life, developed native language, poem in character and the plot. Khalil Hamidi, Kishwari Hagigi, Sururi wrote in the native language, and Shah Qasim Anwar, Badr Shirvani generally wrote in Persian, are inseparable from a literary picture of the period. The name of Jahan Shah Hagigi, the head of Karakoyunlu state, should especially be mentioned among the names of the poets. As his predecessor Ghazi Burhanuddin, he found the time to raise his head from the bloody fight and create his own diwan, but his fate was terrible as that of Ghazi Burhanuddin. His brothers, Turks, were killed by members of Akoyunlu in terrible battles. In 1407, in Isfahan, the capital of Safavids, 20 years lived in the place of Fateh Sultan Muhammad for his personal affliction to Turkey in 15th century. The author of Divan of Lyrical Poems, the historical work Tavarikhi Ali Osman, the history of generation of Osman, Jami Suhangui speaking Piala about fortune telling and autobiographic. Hasbihal name is a well-known representative of 15th-16th century Azerbaijan literature. One of the greatest representatives of 15th century Azerbaijan literature is Nematullah Kishveri. He generally wrote his poems under the influence of Navai, but showed new original poetic styles in Azerbaijan poetical school. Using original poetic characters in poetry, Kishvari occupies a unique place in Azerbaijan literature. He lived in the place of Sultan Yaqub, the ruler of Algoyunlu, and was acquainted with his contemporary Habibi Malikushura, monarch of Assembly of Algoyunlu Palace. The creativity of that period poets as Habibi, Shahi, Suruhi played a great role in the formation of the poetry of Khatai and Fizuli. This is provided by the fact the great Fizuli, under the influence of Habibi's poem, and wrote rich with devices techniques to one of his ghazals. In the 15th century Azerbaijan literature, literary Azerbaijan language, which in many aspects was till that period common with the literary language of other Turkish people, possesses distinctive features, and since 16th century continues its traditions and independent literature. 16th century Baghdad literary environment is especially characterized by deep influence to the national poetry. We may come across with the name of that poets influenced by Baghdad environment in Gulshani Shuara, the Garden of Poets, by Ahti Baghdadi, the memorist of the 16th century, and in Mejmul Hevas, the assembly of the chosen by Sadiq Bey Sadiki, the liberation of Shah Abbas, the role of which is indisputable in attaining wisdom of Fuzuli. In 20th to 16th centuries, Azerbaijan literature, the next peak of Renaissance ideas after Nizami is Muhammad Fuzuli, well known as a heart poet in Western Orientalism. The creativity of Fuzuli had not appeared by itself. A great artist helped to form his personality, to is personality of Fuzuli during a definite period of time. Shah Ismail Khatai, the great statesman and poet of Azerbaijan, the contemporary and somewhat patron of Fuzuli, occupies a particular place among them.
Hi everyone, I am Fidan Allahverdiyeva. I want to continue my speech with talking about change between two eras like medieval era and a new era. Molla Pənah Vaqif and Molla Vali Vidadi were two significant people in 18th century. Molla Pənah Vaqif was born in Qazax Salahlı 1919, 1717. Later, he moved to Shusha, Karabakh Khanate. He wasn't only in a literature way, he was also a politician and served for 20 years as a foreign politician. He was so intelligent, and I am also from Shusha. He was so intelligent that there are quotes about him. And also, I want to say that the difference about his works was it was very in a simple way. The way he wrote. Also, difference is he didn't talk much about religions, really beliefs or Sufi. He was talked about desires, feelings, love, and etc. Also, his works were collected in 1856. First collected in 1856. His remnant was in Shah, but it was destroyed by Armenians. But later, as we took our lands back, it was repaired. And also, I want to say that his works also played in folk music, in traditional music like Görmedim. Now I want to talk about Azerbaijan literature in the beginning of the 19th century. In the beginning, there were some figures such as Qasım Bey Zakir, Seyid Abdülqasım Nabati, Abbasqulu Ağa Bakıxanov, İsmail Bey Qutqaşinli. I want to say that Qasım Bey Zakir were Qasım Bey Zakir determines the direction of poetic development. Seyid Abdülqasım Nabati was mostly about touch about Sufi ideas again. Abbasqulu Ağa Bakırov and İsmail Bey Qutqaşinli, they were showed the Western culture in their works. It shows that after the occupation of Russian Empire, Azerbaijan literature were affected by Western culture. Also, after, as I said, after Russian Empire's occupation, there were many people like Jalal Mehmet Quluzadə, famous people, Jalal Mehmet Quluzadə, Mirza Ələkbər Sabir, Hüseyn Cabir, Abdullah Şaiq, Abbas Səhət, Nəriman Nərimanov, and etc. However, in the most worst period of time, blood repression. Many people repressed because they were intelligent, they were talked about land, they were talked about their country, they were taught Azerbaijan in their poet or in their works. Hüseyin Cabir was one of them. He was sent to Russia. Mikhail Mishvik and his wife was killed and repressed. Çəmənzəli was not only he was also professor in political way. Ahmed Javad was also the author of Azerbaijan anthem was repressed as many others. Also, our literature wasn't only between lands; it was also from borders, such as there were immigrant literature figures. Immigrant literature figures such as Əlbəy Hüseynzadə, Əhməd Ağaoğlu, or Məhəmməd Əmin Rəsulzadə, or Əlmərdan Topçubaşov, Ceyhun Hacıbəyli, Səməd Ağaoğlu, Teymur Ateşli, Musa Zəyam, and etc. Ordubadi was one of the significant ones because he was a well-known developed artist in novel, especially in historical way. Samet Vurgun lived the same in Soviet area, but I really, in my opinion, I really hate him because he talked bad things about people that repress. He talked good things about Soviet area, which was, I think, anti-Azerbaijani action. But yeah, he has good poets about other things in Azerbaijan literature. Rasul Rza. Rasul Rza was one of the immigrant person who lived in 1910 to 1981. Mainly in free verse, played an important role development of poetic thought in Azerbaijani Azerbaijan during a Soviet period of time. Also, there was İlyas Efendiyev and others. Thanks for listening. Now I give my floor to my groupmate.
Azerbaijan's rich and ancient culture is the beginning of the Azerbaijan's literature. Azerbaijan is one of the world's wide cultural resources. Fairy tales and epics from epic folklore genre also had a great influence over surrounding nations of folk and classical art. Folklore and classical poetry also had a role of both in the mythical view. The Avesta, authored by Zoroaster and appear in the Medes land in the 6th century, is the earliest piece of literacy text. The Azerbaijani epic Kitab-ı Dede Korkut is the oldest classic of Azerbaijan's culture. The idealist concepts that had been shaping in the poetry and the cultural ideas throughout that time, it has found its meaning, mainly in the literature of Seyyid İmadeddin Nesimi. Between 1369 1417 years. İmadeddin Nesimi is known in our history as one of the most propagandist and advocates of humanism's concepts, taking the role of Nizami Gencevi. Mehmed Fizuli, known in Western period as researcher of poet of the heart, he was known. Molla Veli Vidadi, the years between 1707 and 1808, and Molla Panah Vagif, 1717 between 1797 years. They both has introduced poetry better for the people. The fundamentals of culture, the fundamentals of traditional literacy, processes, the literary developments in Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijani ideologies were all scientifically proven during the periodization of the nearly a century past in Azerbaijani literature. The new periodization of Azerbaijani literature contains the following steps: the historic Azerbaijani literature, Middle Ages Azerbaijani literature, early modern Azerbaijani literature, educational realism in Azerbaijani literature, national democratic movement in Azerbaijani literature, stage of postmodernism in Azerbaijani literature, the early period and the development period. Azerbaijani literature is present divided into the ancient period, Middle Ages, Azerbaijan Democratic Republic period, current period, and independence period. Thank you.